Okay, let's go ahead and we'll start this up. So what's the first boss here in Wrath of Ashara? Let me go ahead and pause the music too, and we'll get this started. Okay.
I'm gonna go.
You can just chill if you want, but like we're just gonna be looking at the new bosses. Okay, let's see. Okay, Abyssal Commander Savar.
Hello and welcome to Fatboss TV. Today we are delving into the Eternal Palace raid that is due to come out in a few weeks, with a look at the first boss you'll encounter in the dungeon,
so
Abyssal Commander Sivara.
So this single-phase boss is actually relatively complicated when compared to some of the first raid bosses we've seen in recent times.
Shit.
It revolves around the idea of keeping the raids separated to keep the frost and poison from meeting up and causing raid-wide damage.
So this is basically just like that boss in Hellfire Citadel. What was his name? Zul'Arak. That guy was a real cop.
So how does this work? Well, right at the beginning of the fight, the boss will mark half the raid with frost and half the raid with poison.
Okay.
These debuffs deal a small amount of ticking damage, and both have an additional effect. Frost players have 5% reduced movement speed per stack, and poison players take 5% reduced healing per stack. The marks also give you an extra resource bar that you'll want to keep from filling up. Frost players need to keep moving as their bar will slowly fill up if they're stood still, and if it does fail to full, you'll be stunned for 5 seconds. As for poison people, you need to limit your movement, as your bar will only fill up if you move around. If it ever reaches 100%, you'll be disoriented for 5 seconds.
So it doesn't even matter.
If a frost player is hit with a poison ability, or a poison player is hit by a frost ability, they'll deal ticking damage to the raid over 3 seconds, whilst also resetting their debuff stack back to 1.
Oh, okay, that's bad.
Two players of different types touch one another, so you have to split the raid, poison on one side and frost on the other. When the marks are first applied to you at the beginning of the fight, you actually have a short grace period which allows you to pass through other players without triggering the raid-wide damage. This also gives you enough time to get to your correct side. We had frost people move to the far side of the boss, as poison people might get disoriented if they have to move that far on the pole.
Oh no, this is what we're gonna have happen, right? It's made, yeah, it's exactly what I was saying, Maiden of fucking Vigilance, man. This was the most annoying fucking fight in the game. I hated this shit. And I kind of liked it. I kind of like the idea whenever the bosses are very, very, very difficult. The first one's hard, and that way the nubs can't even get into the raid.
Now, with these debuffs in mind, let's have a look at the rest of the boss's abilities.
Okay.
Now, a few players will occasionally be hit with Overflow. This will make them explode after 7 seconds, dealing damage split between all players nearby, whilst leaving a pool of their element type on the ground. This pool will add stacks of its type to anyone who stands within it. Now, although it's possible to solo the Overflow hit, especially on Normal and Heroic, we found it was pretty risky on Mythic, so we always had 1 or 2 people help out.
So you just,
people with the marks
it doesn't
move
even do
away
anything.
from the group and just make sure they place
like
the
literally
pool
does
out of
no
harm's
damage.
way. On our Mythic testing, we decided to do like a Zul'Arak style strategy, where we decided to have the boss start on one side of the room and slowly drag him whenever the raid started to run out of space on their side.
Right, well,
this
that
did
kind of
minimize
makes sense.
the amount of movement needed, which is great for poison people, whilst also making sure the pools were never dropped directly behind the raid. This helps out for when the boss casts Crushing Reverberation, dealing a burst of damage to the current tank split between all players within 5 yards. This also knocks back every single player in the raid.
It's not a big deal.
So by having the pools around 5 to 10 yards to the side of the raid, everyone could just be grouped up on their tank to split the damage, whilst making sure they don't get knocked back into a pool. Now, speaking of tanks, when you are tanking, you'll be receiving a stacking dot.
Oh, that actually does a lot.
You'll create a pool on the ground.
So can't the tank just move into the raid?
And the size of the pool is based on how many stacks you had when it expired.
Holy shit.
We found that taunting around 4 to 6 stacks kept the pool size and overall incoming damage pretty low. You just need to make sure that you move nice and far away from the group when your debuff times out, preferably timing out near the other pools as to keep the room just as clean as you possibly can. Now, one of the cooler abilities happens when the boss reaches 100 energy, because she'll cast Overwhelming Barrage. This creates several bolts around her, frost on one side and poison on the other. These bolts will shoot out in a staggered way over the spell's duration, dealing damage and applying stacks of frost or poison to anyone hit.
So you just don't get hit.
It is possible to sidestep out of the way of these marks.
Yeah, you just don't get hit.
It's difficult to do whilst you're in melee range. We opted just...
No, it's not, because they don't spawn immediately. Like, they sit there and then they go off. Like, you know what it's going to be before it is.
To move to the side of the boss,
I just watched
your mark type.
Hey, you just don't get hit.
From triggering ticking damage to the raid. To minimize raid damage further, you should watch to see when a bolt has traveled out from the boss and then move into that gap, as to avoid getting hit by any of the other bolts.
Yeah, duh.
So far the boss has been pretty simple strat-wise, always keeping the poison and frost people apart from one another. However, her last two abilities kind of force the different marks to interact with each other. The boss will cast frost shock bolts. She will target a random player and then send out a projectile towards them, which is always the opposite elemental type. This projectile will always hit the first person on its path, dealing damage of that elemental type and then pinning them to the ground until somebody comes over and clicks to remove the bolt. Ideally, you will have somebody of the opposite mark take the bolts that targets you, as this will prevent from triggering the raid-wide damage. We decided to have anyone who was targeted to go to the side of the boss that's clear from any of the pools, whilst a non-matching player stands right in front of them to take the hit. Alternatively, you can just ignore the mechanic and just take the raid-wide damage, as only 2 or 3 bolts are thrown out on a row.
This is
and
so
these are
complex.
separated by a large amount of time. Lastly, the boss casts Inversion. This will swap the mark of around a third of your raid. This also roots them for 4 seconds. At the end of the route, anyone within 4 yards that doesn't have the same mark will then begin to proc the raid-wide damage. You need to make sure you move away from those players. And the best way of countering this is just being pre-spread before the ability even comes in. After your debuff is changed, you then want to move to the side that matches your mark. When moving over, people really need to make sure they give them a clear path to the other side, as you don't really want to be touching each other and causing the raid-wide damage. Inversion on Heroic also changes the colour of all the pools on the ground. This is actually pretty useful, as this gives anyone nearby a way of triggering their raid-wide damage and resetting their stacks if they happen to be excessively high. And that's really the last thing you need to worry about on this fight, which is the stacks of the debuff. With the overflowing debuffs that need to be soaked, applying a decent amount of stacks each time you do so, and players likely getting hit by the barrage bolts of their type, player stacks eventually going to get pretty out of control. We found that resetting your stack by deliberately taking the opposite damage type when you reached around 5 to 7 stacks was a pretty good idea, especially if you are poison marked, as you are taking a decent amount of damage whilst receiving much less healing. But you do need to be smart with it. If a large amount of your raid all resets the exact same time, you're almost certainly going to wipe, so you need to do it in a staggered fashion across the entire encounter. But that's everything with the encounter. As you can tell, there is a fair amount of stuff going on for this first boss, and arguably you actually had to have a decent strategy to get anywhere on the PTR.
Okay, I think I figured out the strategy that we're going to use for this boss tomorrow. Let's go ahead and finish up the video and I'll explain it.
That said, we need to emphasize that this is the first boss. Chances are you're going to just zerg this guy down and won't need to have such an organized strategy when it comes to the live version of this fight. But we just wanted to show you what we did, just in case they decide to make this boss as hard as it was on PTR.
Okay.
But anyway, what do we think?
So yeah, as you said, for a first boss, this guy really does have a lot of moving parts, which isn't necessarily
The fuck do you mean he's got a lot of moving parts? He's got more moving parts than every single boss in Molten Core combined. Like, this is insane. Like, that's the first boss? The first fucking boss has got all this shit going on? I don't even know what to say, man. This is ridiculous. Just skip the boss. We can't. It's the first boss. We've got to kill him. He drops loot. How can we skip something that drops loot? It doesn't make any sense.
Thing. Usually they want a boss which is like has maybe 1 or 2 key mechanics, and usually it's more like cinematic than anything else.
Yeah.
Usually it has like a cool gimmick, like, you know, when you went down the elevator on Talok, or it's just very simple, like the Champion of Light encounter in BOD.
Yeah. That was a
Normally,
joke.
the first boss would allow pretty much, you know, half of the group to not really know what's going on at all. You can kind of brute force it.
That's right.
Time. But it seems like everyone is actually going to need to be on the same page when it comes down to the
This is so
mark.
bad,
It's
man.
having like 1 or 2 players
This is so bad.
raid-wide damage because they're just completely oblivious to what's going on is very likely just to wipe your raid group. But overall, I am a fan. On Heroic, this boss was missing a whole lot of polish when it came down to like ability clarification, but after Mythic testing, it did feel very, very good. Things are well telegraphed and easy to read, which is mainly why we've been showing you the Mythic footage for most of this video, if not all of it.
Heroic testing was a complete mess.
It was.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'll explain my strategy that I want to use.
Theme with the different marks, and the mechanics interact in simple yet interesting ways.
So here's basically what we're going to do. Is we're going to have generally 2 different sides of the room that people spread out on, and we're going to pop heroism. We're only going to like 3 or 2 heal it, and we're going to try to burn her down so fast that none of the mechanics matter because she's dead. And so that's basically the plan. Is so we're going to try to just burn her down so fast because it's the first boss, right? And if because the thing is that if she's dead, she's not doing any mechanics. And all of the mechanics here, like, we can lose some people. It's not a big deal. Like, she doesn't have that much health. So it's the same as like people would even be able to speed kill Zul'Rak almost, right? At the end of a HFC. I feel like this is by far the best strategy that we can use. And that way we don't have to rely on people knowing anything about the fight. That way we don't have to rely on people doing the fight correctly. We don't have to rely on anything. All we do is we sit there and then people just do it or not. Social wiping. No, we're not going to wipe at all. It's going to be completely fine. Thinking's hard. Well, it is hard. For people that are in like, a pug or something like that on day one, yeah, they're going to be fucking terrible. So the best thing that I want to do for them is make sure that I don't let them basically fuck themselves up, right? And I want to just get the boss done as fast as possible. That's what matters. Yeah, we don't want to have any sort of a strategy. Nothing like that. We just run in there and we kill the boss. That's it. Okay, so it's a pretty easy boss.
It does leave open several different strategy options, which is generally a good thing, but I'm worried that they're just going to make this boss in such a way that none of it's going to matter. You're just going to go in, people Frost go left, poison people go right, nuke the boss, and generally Overflow can just go to the side. If the fight happens to be a long fight, that's where it starts to become interesting, where you need to
That's
worry
a good
about
idea, huh?
management. But chances are, you are literally just going to go on either side, nuke the boss and put the Overflows to the side, and just, it will die maybe in a messy way, but it's going to die in 3 minutes.
That's right.
Who cares if it's messy?
Yeah,
that's
I think
right.
It's a bit of a shame because I think that is very likely to be the case because
it better be the case. That's my plan.
I think maybe this boss is in the
I'm
wrong
counting
place
on that being the case.
Maybe instead of him being first, he could have been second or third, and you could have put the water boss first.
Well,
Okay, so that's basically what it is. All right, let's go to the next boss here. What's the second boss? Blackwater Behemoth. All right, let's see what this one is.
Hello and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at the second boss in the Eternal
this is
Palace
underwater?
raid, the highly anticipated underwater boss, which is the Blackwater Behemoth.
This
What
encounter
the
has you
fuck?
fighting the boss on a platform for a while, dealing with some pretty simple abilities. After so long,
What?
it will slither away to another platform far from the raid. You
That's
need to chase
fucking
it down
awesome.
and interrupt its cast that will otherwise
Wait, holy
one-shot
shit,
you.
this is really
Now, before
cool.
the fight begins, you want to interact with the oxygen-rich membrane. This will give
I
you a
would hope
permanent
so.
buff which stops you from losing breath and gives you a 100% increased swim speed.
Okay.
This makes the fight actually doable and the bad parts of underwater fighting much more bearable.
Yeah.
Now throughout the fight you'll have a permanent debuff, which reduces all incoming healing by 100%. The only way of removing this is by gaining bioluminescence.
Okay.
On each of the boss's platforms you'll find 2 pufferfish, and when you kill them it will spawn a cloud. When you move into a cloud you'll gain a buff which allows you to be healed for its 45-second duration.
This
You'll
is
be on
awesome.
each platform for around a minute and a half, so you want to kill one pufferfish straight away to gain the buff, and then kill the other just as your debuff drops. This will
Okay.
allow you to be healed for the entire time that you're on a platform. Staying in the confines of the platform is very important. If you have the bioluminescence buff whilst above open waters, you'll gain a new 5-second debuff. And if you don't leave the open waters, you'll be one-shot as a deep-sea lurking monster will shoot out from underneath you.
Oh
Now,
shit.
tanks, you don't actually need the pufferfish to gain the bioluminescence buff.
Oh,
as
shit.
the boss will apply a 15-second debuff, which
This is
essentially does
awesome.
the exact same thing. Tanks do still need to swap on the boss because he does gain
This
a
is
stacking
really, really
attack
cool,
speed
man.
buff, which only resets when the boss starts hitting a new target. We did this every 15 seconds or so.
Okay.
Whilst tanking the boss, it's vital that you stay within melee range at all times. The moment that you leave melee range, he's going to start hitting other people, or he's just going to do massive raid-wide damage.
So he's stuck in place,
Now,
basically.
moving on to some of the stuff the boss does to the raid. Aside from occasionally sending out some dots on players with its toxic spine attack, which simply just
Can I
needs to
get
be
that shield?
out-healed, the boss will cast Shock Pulse. This cast will push all players away from the boss over its cast, and at the end it will deal a burst of damage to the entire raid. Now, the further from the boss you are when this cast ends, the less damage you take.
Okay,
So you want
so
to
you
be
just have to run
reasonably
away.
far from the boss when the cast ends, but you want to make sure you stay on the platform, as otherwise a fish
Wait a second, the Demon Hunter and the Rogue just stood in melee, I'm pretty sure. They didn't even move.
will come and eat you, and tanks just make sure you get back to the boss nice and quickly.
Okay.
Now, the last ability the boss will cast whilst on the platform wasn't actually active when we last tested the boss. This is the boss's bioelectric feelers. Every 4 seconds, the boss will do a scan of the raid. If it finds any players within 5 yards of one another, it will shock those players for 50k. This damage doesn't seem to ramp up with the
Okay.
amount of players in the clump, but 50k damage per 4 seconds on the entire raid seems like something that you'll want to avoid.
Yeah, that's
this
pretty
will force you
bad.
to spread 5 yards apart
Alright.
from each other, something that might be difficult if you don't take the vertical space into account. Now, how this interferes with players picking up the pufferfish cloud is somewhat unknown, but it's safe to say that you'll either all want to pick it up at once and just take a few hits on the raid, something that could probably easily be countered by cooldowns, or you want to pick up the buff in a staggered way, reducing the amount of people hit by their bioelectric feelers. Just do make sure that you pick up the buff before it despawns.
So we're just gonna have everybody run in there and pop CDs. Like, that's easy. Like, we can probably do that stupid-ass shit on Heroic, too, even. Like, it's not even going to be a big deal.
Alternatively, this ability might just be up for certain periods of time, meaning that you'll want to get the buff whilst the boss isn't scanning for players. We just don't know at the moment. Either way, once you've fought the boss for so long and it has gained 100 energy, it will slither away to a platform far from the group and begin to cast Cavitation.
And that's whenever you have to interrupt
If this cast does go through, it will deal 370k damage to the group every 2 seconds. So you need to get to it and interrupt this before it wipes you.
Okay.
So you will need to travel through open water, which will kill you after 5 seconds if you have that bioluminescence buff. So you need to make sure that is dropped before you start swimming across.
Oh, wow.
Towards the back of the platform, slipstreams have formed. Moving into one of these...
So if you have the bioluminescence buff... I see. So if you go over open water with the bioluminescence, then the things will eat you. So you have to wait for the debuff to expire, then you have to run over. So you can't just pick that debuff up whenever. That's actually really good. I like that a lot, because there's no way you can make it over from like point A to point B in like 5 seconds. There's no fucking way. Holy shit.
These will give you an 11-second buff, which increases your movement speed whilst forcing your character forward. You need to navigate towards the boss whilst avoiding jellyfish that are scattered along the route, as touching one will give you bioluminescence, attracting the one-shot fishes. Once we reached the new platform, we waited for everyone to arrive before interrupting the boss.
That's real good. I like that a lot.
Repeats from here. You just gain a pufferfish buff at the start, deal with the boss's abilities, gain another pufferfish buff 45 seconds later, deal with the boss's abilities, and then swim to the last platform.
Right.
The main change between the platforms is that there are now gaps in them that count as open water. You need to make sure that you're not pushed into or otherwise swim into these areas for too long, otherwise you will be eaten whole.
Oh.
But largely, that's it for this
fight.
So
okay.
So when we first tested this boss on Heroic, it was an absolute
That was Twitch,
mess.
not
we
me.
were moving super slow because they hadn't put the swim speed increase in. The transition with the jellyfish, there was hardly any of them, so you didn't even really
that
need
was
to
Twitch.
avoid them. You could just swim directly to the platform. Also, the boss was doing a crazy amount of raid-wide damage. So we actually ended that test early. I think we killed it. I can't even remember. I just mentally blocked it because we hated it that much. However, moving into Mythic, with the swim speed increase, with the transition actually having jellyfish to dodge, it feels like a much better fight, and it's nowhere near as bad as we initially thought. The only thing I would say, though, is that have they been a little bit tame? They've definitely got the underwater theme down because, well, you're underwater, there's fish that would jump out and eat you.
It's so cool.
So they got the theme down. But mechanically, did they play really safe here? Could they have done more things that are sort of surround the whole idea of being underwater?
Well, of course they could have, but here's why Blizzard doesn't want to do that, is because basically the boss, I mean, look at the boss, right? He literally does like 2 things. He does 2 fucking things. He does the fucking electrocution whenever you group up with somebody, and then you can get eaten and he runs away, and you have to interrupt him. Like, this is the easiest fucking boss in the game. And Blizzard doesn't want to make it too hard. Why do they not want to make it too hard? It's because they expect everybody to hate underwater fights. So because everybody hates the underwater fights, then they want to make it as simple as possible, right? I think that's really the main reason, is they're afraid to make people do something that they don't want to do. I think that's basically what it is. I know an easier boss. Well, yeah, I can think of a number of them too. But overall, I think that's their strategy.
Of course, you need to be a little bit careful. They made it so, you know, there's mechanics where you start to suffocate. You know, you're physically running out of breath. There's so many ways you could choose it. You just stack druids, they go in aquatic form.
Yeah.
You know, undeads, they have slightly longer time in which they can breathe in. I think that's still a thing. There's
I think they're like can't they like breathe forever now?
From like
underwater
as an example.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, they are limited somewhat. I don't even know what I would personally add. I just feel like they could have done something more that somehow worked with the idea of being underwater. And even if they didn't do that, I think just the general mechanics as they have now, of course we didn't get the opportunity to see the feelers, but could they have added more mechanics, especially as the fight goes on? Because as you move from one platform to another, it's essentially the exact same thing, except the platform is slightly smaller, or it has gaps in it.
That's not really a big deal.
Things, you know, such as the
it's not a big deal at all.
It makes it a little bit more difficult, which is kind of cool. But could they have added something else? Could there be megalodons coming out the wall and chomping at your feet, applying dots to people, or some shit like that?
One-shot. There's a megalodon chomping at your feet. That is a one-shot mechanic.
You get what I'm saying, right?
I do get what you're saying. There isn't really much
this boss fight
use
does seem awesome
from being spread out. And if your raid
I
size
like
is
this
small
a lot.
enough, you don't even need to go up. You could still be 5 yards spread in a 10-man group easily. Probably even a 30-man group if you really wanted to. Like, if you're like, yeah, fuck you, Blizzard, I'm not going to swim. You, in theory, could all be on the platform still. So it would be interesting. Maybe there are like slipstreams that will try and push you off the platform if you're at certain heights. The whole idea of using vertical space.
Okay.
They could definitely do a lot more with that idea. But yeah, maybe they're just trying to play it safe. It is, as you said, kind of like their first underwater boss in a while. Maybe they're just...
It's the first underwater boss
They're
ever.
afraid.
Well, yeah, I suppose. It might be one of the 5-man, like a long ago that I've
I can't
forgotten
remember
about.
one at
But
least.
with a raid
Like,
boss.
yeah, that's actually a good question. When was the last time that Blizzard actually did do an underwater boss? I want to just go ahead and pause here. That one's basically over. I want you guys just to see me get this mount here real quick. SSC? I mean, I don't even really consider SSC like really an underwater boss, like the lurker below. Yeah, I don't think they've really ever had one. Watch me get the mount right here. Watch me get the mount. Watch me get the mount. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Did you see the G2A oopsie today? No, I didn't. I have no idea about that. I've never heard about that at all. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'll look at the rest of this.
At least it's the first proper underwater one, and maybe they were just trying to make.
I'll do another
that
run.
Worked.
Might as well.
It looks kind of cool because it does, but it is early in the instance. They probably didn't want to go overboard, and they were just like, "Let's just make this work. Let's just make it maybe a loop."
Well, it already is overboard
just
because
kind
it's
of
in the
look
water.
cool. And have they done that? Probably.
Yeah, I think they again, I don't want to take too much away from it. It
Okay.
is a good start, but I think they could have done so much more.
Aesthetically, this boss is fucking awesome. Like, let's just get that out of the way right now. Shady G2A offers to pay journalists to run pre-written article defending them. Okay, remind me to watch that whenever we finish all of these videos here, okay? I'd love to watch that. I'm assuming that video sounds like it's either a quartering or a Jim Sterling video, right? Based off of the title. Yeah, but right now I want to finish the rest of these. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that this boss is fucking awesome. I really like this boss. Aesthetically, it looks really, really cool. And at the end of the day, like being in like a cool environment while you're fighting a boss like that, I do think does matter a lot in like a lot of ways. So I like that a lot. This is overall a good boss. Asmongold, mount again. Okay, let me queue this up again. I'm gonna do the same thing again. So if you want to come and be part of this, go ahead and queue up right now. Okay, here we go. All right, what's the next boss after this? So it is... let me check for the third boss. I'm assuming it's Raids, Eternal Palace, Radiance of Ashara. Okay, sounds good. Let me go ahead and invite everybody, then we'll go ahead and we'll start this up. So what did you guys think about that boss? I'm actually curious. Okay, let's see. You waking up early tomorrow for the raid? Yeah, I am. I'm absolutely waking up early. Okay, let's go this way. Yeah, it's cool. I like the boss too. I wish that Blizzard would do more things like that. It seems like oftentimes like they're kind of afraid of doing anything that's like really kind of crazy because they don't want people to. I don't even know like really what it is. They don't want to overwhelm people or some kind of bullshit. But I do hope that they actually do. Oh shit! Did we invite too many people? All right, Burke. Sorry, we're not gonna have a spot for you. Okay, good. Let me go ahead and set people for tank and DPS. Okay, McConnell, you're gonna tank. Let's see, McConnell. What did you think of the boss?
It's a boss. I don't really care.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's basically the way that a lot of people feel, I'm pretty sure. But in terms of bosses, I think that it's better than most. In terms of the aesthetics of the boss. All right, Radiance of Ashara.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at the third boss in the Eternal Palace with the Radiance of Ashara encounter.
This two-phase fight takes place on a massive ring-shaped platform. Mechanically, the fight is very similar to Wrath of Ashara, the boss from the Legion 5-man Eye of Ashara.
Hey, again, guys, hey, again, you don't use up your good ideas. If you have one good idea, do it again. If you have a really, really good idea, do it again after that again. Accrues go DPS, don't go tank. Yeah, it's just that fucking simple.
Mechanics, as the water surrounding the platform deal massive ticking damage, killing you pretty quickly if you fail. Let's start off by explaining phase 1.
So for everyone to watch out for is the tornadoes. These spawn throughout this phase very frequently and are the most annoying thing in the encounter to deal with. The initial spawn location deals damage if you're stood within it, and a few seconds later, the tornado will spiral out from that location until it despawns a little while later.
That's easy.
Because of the way these move away from where they spawn, you can easily counter them by waiting for them to spiral away and then move into their initial spawn location.
Oh!
The only issue is that they spawn so frequently that you'll have to move almost constantly to pull it off, especially...
So this is exactly the same as the boss in King's Rest. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is pretty much it. Am I wrong? I think that I am. Okay, we have to get one more healer. Somebody else dropped.
If you stack the entire raid.
Yeah, that's
which
good.
Might work for some classes, but for casters, it's not great. You can, however, spread around the entire platform to generally spread the tornadoes out, and this is what we did for the most part, and it seemed to work well.
All right.
You do need to be careful not to spread too far from the raid because of two other mechanics. First is Unshackled Power. This is an unavoidable burst of damage to the entire raid, and this happens a lot, and is the main source of incoming damage that healers need to deal with. Second is Arcane Bomb.
Easy.
This debuff is applied to 3 members of the raid. When it times out, it will deal a burst of damage to all players in the targeting circle, stunning them for 6 seconds.
Okay.
This is dispellable, and when it is dispelled, it will just remain in its location, which if dispelled in a really poor place, can completely cut people off. So ideally when the debuffs come out, the debuff players should move towards the back of the platform or any area that isn't overly populated and then be dispelled. Lastly to mention for this phase is the tank debuff Tide Fist. This is a 2-second cast that deals a burst of physical damage and increases your physical damage taken by 200% for 20 seconds. So
I love how, like, Blizzard, this happened in Wrath. Blizzard got this idea in their head that every single boss needed a tank swap mechanic. And so every single one now has the exact same thing. There is some sort of an ability that casts onto the tank, and the other tank takes taunts off of the first tank because the first tank is taking a lot of damage. That's exactly how it is. It's so fucking annoying. They do the same shit every time. I actually am getting kind of bored of that. It seems like, I mean, why don't we have fights with 3 tanks or 1 tank? It makes things more exciting. Why don't we have a fight with 4 tanks? You know, make things a little bit more exciting and even more so, right? It's like every single fight is supposed to be done with 2 tanks. I think they're not thinking outside of the box enough. For 25 tanks? Hey. Why not?
all you need to do is very simple, just taunt off each other after a single stack.
Yeah, it's simple.
After you've dealt with all of that for so long and the boss reaches 90% mana or so, he'll begin to cast Skull Trap.
Okay.
These traps create roadblocks on the platform. Moving into one of the circles will destroy it, but it'll also spawn a tornado. Shortly after the traps are spawned and the boss reaches 100% mana, he'll go dormant and take 99% less damage. This is the start of phase 2. Immediately you're hit with a storm which reduces your vision and deals ever-increasing ticking damage. Your goal here is to find the Eye of the Storm and kill the Storm Wraith within it.
Yeah, this is actually badass. I like this a lot.
The ad has multiple set spawn locations, but typically it appears that it will try and spawn as far away from the majority of your raid as it can. When running towards him, you'll want to only remove a single trap per wall. Any more than that, and people are likely to get caught out or just blocked further by tornadoes.
This seems pretty easy so far.
You'll no longer take the storm damage.
So this is exactly like the Kill Jaden thing, where he goes into the darkness phase and you have to run to where Illidan is. Except for instead of running to where Illidan is and then going somewhere else, you just stay there.
But your vision will still be limited. The Wraith needs to be interrupted when his focus power is cast. This simply just increases his damage by 500% if it goes through. Aside that, he'll cast Gale Buffet.
Why even have that?
This deals a burst of damage and knocks back your entire raid. Ideally, you'll want to position yourself so you're not knocked into the waters around the platform. If you move the ad to one side of the storm and the raid stacks directly behind it, you'll remain within the eye while being knocked back, which prevents you from taking a shitload of damage from the storm. Within the eye, there's also Stormlings that will continue to spawn throughout the phase. These will just deal damage to random players and for the most part can just be ignored and cleaved down.
This is a joke. This is another joke fight.
Continue to spawn throughout phase 2. You'll want to dispel these around the edges of the storm, ideally in locations where players are not going to be knocked into. Once the Storm Wraith is dead, the boss will re-enter phase 1 again, and from there, the fight just simply repeats. And that wraps up the boss. But with all of our boss previews, what do we think?
Yeah, it's not a terrible encounter. It's very simple, and for the most part, the mechanics are pretty self-explanatory, which works well on a boss that's early in the
Thank God.
Some people have commented on the fight saying
this
it's
is good.
Easy for Blizzard to copy and paste a 5-man boss, which I can understand.
What do you mean? Copy and paste a 5-man boss? Like, they've been doing that forever. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm okay with that. That's okay. Look at Dragon Soul. Like, most of the bosses in Dragon Soul were copy-pasted to begin with. Look at this. Morchok, copy-paste. Zanaz, copy-paste. Yorsaj, copy-paste. Hagara, copy-paste. Like, all of the mobs were just, like, random NPCs. Nobody gave a shit to begin with. It's not a big deal. So, yeah, I think this boss is really easy.
But, you know, you could say that it's like a nice little callback, or maybe you've just expanding upon that boss.
And he's also really big, which makes the boss fight better.
You've got the arcane bombs, which, in all fairness, strangely enough, the arcane bombs in the 5-man were way easier to read than the arcane bombs in the raid, because the raid has this weird little rune system as it like kind of ticks up, and you have to look.
I love it whenever Blizzard uses visibility as a difficulty. Like, oh, you can't see the mechanic that well. I actually fucking hate that, dude. Like, the idea that you shouldn't be able, like, you should know what's going on. I hate it whenever the being able to notice if something is happening or not is part of the difficulty. I just feel like that's really, really cheap gameplay.
It to know when it's going to explode. Whereas the one from the 5-man is just a falling bomb. It's very obvious how it works.
Yeah.
Going on to this version of the fight, there are a couple of aspects of the fight that are questionable. Some of the school trap walls had gaps where your character could just kind of move straight through them.
Yeah.
It seemed like on the normal mode test, which we did very, very recently, they kind of fixed that a little bit.
Easy.
Not entirely sure, but if
easy
you can
game.
just get around it without having to deal with the mechanic at all, that seems like why is the mechanic there in the first place.
Yep.
So
Okay.
hopefully they fix that up. And secondly is the tornadoes. This entire fight, pretty much, apart from the phase 2, is just tornadoes, tornadoes, tornadoes. It's all you have to focus on. It honestly feels that the fight might be improved if they maybe reduced the amount of tornadoes that spawned, but maybe gave you one other thing to deal with. Like, you remember in the 5-man where you had to stack up and spread the damage of that ability, maybe they could add that back. Basically,
that's a really good point.
I actually like whenever boss fights are simple. I'll be honest, I do, because it's not, you don't have to worry about it a lot. The players don't have to learn a bunch of shit. Like, obviously, to a high-end raider, this is going to be something that, like, oh, well, we want it to be more complex. But for me personally, I want to just have simple boss fights that are easily understood. And it's not even for me, right? I don't care. I can figure out a complex boss fight. I did Siegecraft on Mythic, etc., right? It's that for the average player, I don't think that's really good for them. You know, it's just way too complex. Personally, yeah, I mean, I'd be okay with it if they had a more complex, like, personally, but I don't think they're good for the game.
Why isn't that there?
I don't know. Why didn't they just give us the 5-man version of the fight? Because honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I actually prefer the 5-man version of the fight over this one. You know, you've got the whole idea where you slowly move around the actual platform, making use of the entire space. On this, you sit on one side and deal with the tornadoes. You just dodge, dodge, dodge. And if you're in a super large raid size, you can just split it in two. Half the raid on one side and the other raid on the other. And then on average, you're less likely to get more tornadoes. But yeah, it feels like there's less things going on in this raid version of a boss than there was in the 5-man. And I'm not even talking about like 5-man Mythic 20 or anything like that. Just 5-man, you know, standard Mythic Plus.
Okay, so that's basically what the boss fight is. Somebody says that's the type of thinking that ruined retail in the first place. No, it's not. It's the opposite. The problem is Blizzard tried to make the boss fights too complex because they wanted to have the game scale with add-ons, and they wanted to make the difficulty in raids actually doing the raids. The fact is, in Classic WoW, whenever the raids were easier, they were more accessible to more people. You didn't need the multiple different difficulties because you didn't have turbo nodes with 18 different add-ons and 76 different weak auras trying to do one boss super easy, and they basically make it like LFR. No, the fact is that Blizzard ruined their game by trying to make it too hard and appeal to people that are just like super hardcore. Like, that's why Cataclysm was fucking garbage, is because the raids were too hard. You went from ICC, where the mechanics were like two things, and then you go into fucking BWD, and there's 8 different mechanics you have to deal with, and people stopped playing the game because it was too hard for them. Like, look, I know everybody in here thinks that they're really good at the game, but even if you are good at the game, you're not the majority. BWD was hard. Compared to ICC, mechanic-wise, yeah, it was. Like, absolutely. Neckbeards on Suicide Watch? Well, it's because they think that they're like, they're just stupid. They don't realize, like, how bad that is for the game, for them to add 15 different mechanics for one boss. It's insane. Majority can do Heroic, LFR, and farm mounts, hello? Yeah, exactly. And that's why we have all these different difficulties now, is because they're like, oh, well, everybody has their own different difficulty, and nothing matters. Blizzard should have never tried to cater to hardcore players that much. It was a mistake. Why play a game with no difficulty? It's a matter of degree, not a matter of no difficulty or all difficulty. Okay, let's go to the next one. It's designed with add-ons weaker as in mind. I don't like that, personally. Old War hard mode and some ICC hard modes were brutal before nerfs, but the mechanics were simple. Like, the problem with Cataclysm is there was too many mechanics going on. Like, the bosses just have too many mechanics for an average player. That's the issue. That's why add-ons became so prevalent. That's why people are using add-ons for everything, is because you can't do it without the add-ons. There's too many mechanics. It's overwhelming. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Lich King Heroic was not easy. Do you know why the Lich King Heroic wasn't easy? It's because you only had 15 attempts to kill him. Do you genuinely think that the players in Method wouldn't have killed Lich King Heroic if they had 700 attempts like they did with KJ? Of course they would have. 50, not 15. It was 50 across the entire raid, I thought. Was it 50? Yeah, well, let's just say it was 50. Still, I mean, they didn't have enough attempts to kill him. Ashara has so many mechanics? Yeah, well, we'll see.
Hello there, guys, and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at another encounter from the Eternal Palace with the 4th boss, Lady Ashvane.
So this is our personal favourite in the instance up to this point. This two-phase encounter is all about maximising boss damage to keep incoming raid damage to survivable levels during Phase 1, whilst in Phase 2, you need to clear up the room, removing coral fragments that spawn throughout Phase 1. Anyway, let's kick straight into it by showing how Phase 1 plays out.
Okay.
So first to mention is
so this is Lady
positioning.
Ashvane right here. This is what she turned into.
Barnacle Bash. This deals a large amount of physical damage and increases the damage you take from that hit by 150% for 35 seconds. So you'll want to tank swap after each hit. This also leaves behind a large patch of sharp coral that deals a large amount of damage to anyone who stands within it. You want to slowly move the boss around the edges of the room as these spawn. However, you may also need to move because of the coral growths. These spawn randomly throughout the room on a timer,
so just
dealing a burst of damage to anyone that's within their landing zone. These coral formations will remain stationary throughout the fight. When the boss casts Rippling Wave, every coral growth will spawn a bubble that will begin to travel towards the boss. If they reach her, they'll effectively heal her and deal raid-wide damage.
Oh shit.
These bubbles can, however, be soaked by players, dealing raid-wide damage but also debuffing the player of waterlogged. This is a stacking dot with a lengthy duration. So as a tank, you want to position the boss so that there is a good distance between her and any coral growths. This will allow enough time for players to soak bubbles, with enough downtime in between each soak for healers to top the incoming raid damage.
Okay, that makes sense.
When soaking, we found going above 2 or 3 stacks was pretty dangerous, so you want to rotate different players each time. The bubbles come in every 30 to 40 seconds or so, and as more coral growths spawn, the more you'll have to soak, to the point where it's no longer really manageable.
So you just have to kite her around.
From spawning is by entering Phase 2,
this boss
which is
awesome.
done by destroying the boss's carapace.
Yeah, I like this a lot.
This is displayed as a large absorption shield.
This is actually really cool.
40% of her maximum health, and this is why you need a lot of damage. You gotta break her shield before the phase becomes unhealable.
Now, whilst all of that is going on, you need to watch out for the upsurge circles. These deal a massive amount of damage and will knock you high into the air of your court. You've just got to be quick to avoid them, especially when bubbles are being soaked. Last to mention is the Briny Bubble. This debuff is applied to 3 members of your raid, including one of your tanks. When the debuff times out, it will cause all players within the targeting circle around each debuff player to be encased in a bubble, which will incapacitate them until the bubble is destroyed. Players that are bubbled will also take moderate ticking damage. On our heroic and mythic testing, we tried to stack these players so the bubbles could just be cleaved down. However, on our normal mode, which was the most recent test, the debuff had no targeting circle around it and only applied to the player. Yet in the dungeon journal, it suggests that it will still encase other players within 12 yards.
Well, that's
so how
easy.
It'll work on live servers, we're still not quite sure. Regardless, you want to free the players as soon as possible, focusing primarily on the tank. And once you've got the hang of dealing with all of those mechanics and destroyed the boss's absorb shield, you'll enter Phase 2.
Oh shit.
Now at this point, the boss will begin to actually take damage, while she deals small bursts of damage to random players. She will continue to spawn upsurge circles and debuff players with Briny Bubble, but the corals will not be prompted to spawn bubbles. Instead, she'll debuff 3 pairs of players with Arcing Azurite. This creates markers above the player's head with pairs matching. After 8 seconds, a beam is sent between the matching marks, dealing damage to the debuff players as well as anyone in between them.
Oh my god.
This beam will also one-shot any coral growth. So the moment the debuffs come out, you need...
Wait, that's fucking awesome. Wait, no, that's real. Look at the marks right there. So you've got the anchor and then the anchor. And then so it shows up over their head. So everybody knows what they are. And you stand in between them and it destroys... That's actually really cool.
This beam will also one-shot any coral growths. So
Does
the
it
moment the
one-shot
debuffs
players?
come out,
I wonder.
you need to identify where your matching mark is and stand in such a way that maximizes the amount of coral that you destroy, while simultaneously dodging any of the beams from opposite marks. If done correctly throughout the phase, you can destroy all of the coral formations before you re-enter phase 1 for a second time. And if you don't manage to do this, you'll go into phase 1 already behind. Ultimately, this could lead to a wipe later on down the line as you fall behind on the bubble soaking damage. Anyway, after you've been in phase 2 for around 60 seconds, she'll re-enter phase 1 and the fight repeats. However, what we've failed to mention so far is that each time she reapplies a new carapace, it's 150% larger than the previous. This makes phase 1 much longer each time you enter it, which seems to be the pseudo-enrage of the fight. And based on the testing we've done so far on all 3 difficulties, it seems likely that they expect you to do phase 1 3 times, killing the boss in the 3rd phase too.
I like this boss already, I do, because it seems like it's a boss that has an enrage timer. Now, I really think that it's important for bosses to have enrage timers and for DPS to... Oh, God! Okay, I made it. For people to be able to, like, have their damage matter. I think that's an issue in a lot of fights nowadays, is that DPS doesn't really make a big difference. And now having more bosses like that, that's very important. I think it's good.
As for the mythic version of this fight, it adds an additional larger bubble each time that the growths are prompted. This requires multiple soaks to remove, which just generally increases incoming raid damage by a shitload. And the waterlog debuff that it leaves on you is permanent, so you actually have to get everyone involved. During phase 2, whenever a coral growth is laser beamed, it'll attempt to respawn multiple versions of itself in targeting zones 5 seconds later.
So you just have to stand in those.
So yeah, this fight on Mythic could potentially be the first block in the instance based on its tuning, which on PTR was absolutely nuts. But either way, before we end the video, what do we think?
So it's easily the best fight
like this
in
boss.
here up to this point. Yeah. And if the last 2 weren't so good, it would probably be the best in the instance. It's really fun to DPS because you need to be on top of your game and burst the boss down as fast as you can while swapping to bubbles and soaking.
Yeah, this is actually awesome.
It's really, really fun to heal because, well, there's a shitload to heal and it's all predictable damage on timers. And I'd say it's probably also quite fun to tank because you need to play a constant minigame of moving from the patches underneath you whilst also taking into account the distance between the boss and new coral growths. A few things we should mention about the fight that we're not totally sure on, though, is the patches on Heroic and Mythic, they never despawned, whereas on Normal they despawned after a certain amount of time. If that's intended, then potentially the enrage on the fight isn't so much to deal with phase 1 length, but actually the remaining space in the room. And this is even more unclear because on some of the tests you could stack the patches, whereas on others you could actually overlap them slightly. Hopefully it doesn't come down to a lack of space wiping you, though, as the idea, you know, of coral.
I don't mind that. I actually think lack of space wiping is kind of interesting. It's like you ran out of room.
But aside from that, I think it's only praise that we have for this fight.
Yeah, it's all relatively easy to
this actually seems like a badass fight right here.
Fun from
I like it a lot.
Aspects. And mainly, I'm just worried about tuning, because it could be a really decent mythic boss, but if they get the tuning wrong, it could turn into a massive brick wall on week 1, and that'll just lead to another fetid situation where everyone's just like, oh god. Yeah. This boss is terrible. And the thing is, you can't go and choose another boss after this one. This one, it blocks the 5th boss. So you have to kill her first. So hopefully they get the tuning right, where it's still challenging, but it's not a huge wall.
I really like being able to destroy the coral. I like that a lot.
Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with this boss, ready to kill it immediately once it hits.
Yeah, I think that boss is fucking awesome. Like, this is probably the coolest one that I've seen so far. I think the first boss is going to be really fun on, like, Mythic or something, but if it's not on Mythic, it'll probably just be a joke, and you can just probably face roll it, and it won't even matter, honestly. If it's so hard. I mean, no, it's more that I get a group together here of people that are, like, super overgeared to kill Jaina, and we just clear it, and it doesn't even matter. Let's see, would there ever be a raid better than Oldawar? I mean, it's hard really to say. I don't think so. McConnell, what do you think about this boss?
Looks great, man.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So, how do you deal with the coral?
Huh? You, break it.
And how do you do that?
Well, you just click on it.
All right. Tomorrow's going to be real interesting. I can already tell. This is great. Okay, let's go to the next one. And I'm assuming Oragosa is the next one here.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at the fifth boss in the Eternal Palace with Orgorzoa.
This 2-phase encounter takes place in 2 different rooms separated by a ramp covered in traps that you need to avoid. Anyway, let's jump straight in and talk about Phase 1.
Oh, what
So
the
to start
fuck?
off, let's talk about the tanks. Now, this
All right.
boss hits insanely hard, like harder than anything else you've seen so far this expansion. However, the boss will slowly stack
His health isn't even going down,
desensitizing
though.
Sting on you, reducing all incoming damage you take by 10% per stack.
Yeah.
Now, at 10 stacks, you will instantly die.
Yeah, his
you
health
need
isn't
to
going
tank swap
down.
before this. However, as you won't have any stacks on the pool, and whenever you
What do you
initially
mean?
tank swap, you want to make sure that you have cooldowns chaining until you at least have a couple of stacks.
Okay.
Now, the Sting debuff isn't just great for countering boss damage, it's super useful for the adds. On a timer, 3 Zotroid adds will spawn in. These guys deal small bursts of unavoidable damage to the entire raid.
Okay.
And if they're near the boss, they will gain a 50% damage dealt and reduced damage taken buff, so you've got to tank them 15
So this is the
yards
same
away.
as like the second boss
The
in
DPS need
Crucible.
to swap to the adds and just kill them off before the next set
That's fine.
spawns in. However, when they die, they do leave behind a splatter puddle. These will explode after 5 seconds, dealing lethal raid-wide damage unless you soak them. But when you do soak them, they still hit incredibly hard, so this is where your
Okay.
tanks come in. By having the tank swap
Oh,
the
with
moment
the
adds come in,
debuff.
providing that the adds die in time,
Okay.
the tank will still have sting sacks that you can use to soak the puddles.
Of
taking far less
course.
damage than any other raid members.
That's smart.
And if that tank stacks did happen to drop for whatever reason, then immunities like ice blocks also work
Holy
well.
shit. Yeah, that's actually a really
Now,
good
aside
idea.
from the ads, the raid also has to watch
I
out
like
for
that.
dribbling Ica. These circles come in 3 waves and cover large areas of the room. Getting caught deals massive damage, potentially lethal damage on Heroic and Mythic.
Okay.
Now the gaps are easy to get to, you just got to stop casting and immediately move when they spawn.
That's simple.
Last to mention for the
So that's gonna kill basically half the raid. I just want to make sure you guys understand that. That's gonna, yeah, that's basically like the Stampers in Hands and Friends. Like, I'm pretty sure that's a pretty good analogy.
phase is the incubation fluid. This permanent debuff is applied to a single player early in the fight, and
Okay.
more are applied randomly throughout. All this does is a small amount of ticking damage, but
That's
towards
simple.
the end of the phase, this debuff is applied to almost everybody, forcing healers to chain cooldowns to keep everyone up. This debuff is made worse by the
That's a
Arcane
lot.
Current cast. The boss will use this ability on a timer, dealing a moderate burst of damage to some players.
Okay,
with
yeah, I can't zone
incubation
into this.
fluid.
All right, Horde raid.
This acts like a chain lightning effect as well, making the fluid debuff also jump to other players if they're too close to you. So debuff players need to keep spread, making sure that when the Arcane Current is cast, it doesn't hit additional players.
Okay.
Anyway, after dealing with all of that for around 3 minutes, the third set of Zotroid adds will spawn. All incubation
Not
fluid
good.
debuffs are removed, and the boss will open up the back wall and run down the ramp. Once he makes it all the way to the bottom, he'll begin to cast Massive Incubator.
What the fuck?
If this cast goes off, it awakens the denizens of the hatchery. We have no idea what that is, but it sounds really fucking bad.
So
we just made
basically
sure that we
everybody
interrupted
dies.
it. The duration
That's
of the
what it
cast
comes down
was
to.
different on each test, which is relevant because we're not sure what strategy you're actually supposed to use here.
Okay.
You've got to go and interrupt the boss, but you also have a new set of ads spawn at the same time. If possible, you want to kill the ads first
What
and
the
then run
fuck?
down to interrupt.
So we have to run
But what
all the way
appears
down
more
there.
likely is that you need to run down first and wait for the ads to follow. We tried both and had mixed results. Whenever we ran straight down, the ads would just evade and not come
That's
down
actually
after
ba- dude,
us. So
imagine
this is
if you could
something we
glider
don't
down
really
there.
know how it'll work until the boss
Yeah,
hits
we
live
can.
servers. Now, whilst you are running down the ramp, you do need to avoid AoE patches and eggs. Both of these have a knockback effect, and getting knocked off into the middle will make you fall to your death. We found that you can also
Okay.
drop all the way to the end using a speed increase on the high ledge, but this is very risky as there is an egg directly below you as you land. It is
Okay.
possible to avoid it, but you have to face your camera perfectly to do so.
Okay.
However, on our very latest test, it appears that they've also added flying jellyfish around the area where you can jump down.
That's a danger fish right there. Just 1 second. I want to get everybody in here and queue this up. Okay, guys, queue up for the role that I assign you, and then we can start this. I just sent an invite out to 1 person, and we should be able to do this. Okay, we have 1 person. All right, I'm going to set myself as a tank. And
Yeah, don't you? I don't want to tank, dude. I'm not a tank.
I know you're not a tank, dude. Trust me.
I don't
I'm-
tank ever.
Okay, I understand that. All right, let's go back over here. We'll queue it up. All right, guys, please queue as the role that I assigned you.
And these jellyfish just one-shot you if you're too close to them. So it's
Okay.
likely far safer just to go down the ramp rather than trying to completely avoid it.
Okay.
Regardless, once you're at the bottom and you've interrupted the boss, phase 2 will begin.
This phase is mechanically identical to phase 1, you just have a far larger room to play in. You'll also have 3 new
Okay.
ads spawn, and which ads you get seems to be entirely random, they don't seem to have any set spawn pattern. can get warriors, which are named Myrmidons in the Dungeon Journal, which will cast Aqualance at random players. This deals a burst of damage and leave behind a patch of ticking shit. So you just got to make sure as soon as you're targeted that you move towards the edges of the room just to keep the encounter space clean.
That's simple.
As for the witches, they will cast Shocking Lightning, which deals a burst
I like
of
how
damage
they
to
run
random
away.
players, as well as Conductive Pulse, which stuns everyone for 3 seconds if it's not interrupted. So it's very important that that's covered.
Okay.
And lastly, the Hulks. They'll cast Powerful Stomp. This will create a targeting circle around them that deals massive physical damage split between all players within it. And if no players are within the circle, then the entire raid will just take a large burst of damage. So you'll want the majority of your raid to stand in the initial circle just to split the damage. But aside from those 3 new guys, it's just nuke ads whenever they spawn, whilst dodging circles and spreading as much as you can to minimize the incoming raid damage from arc and current casts.
I mean, I think that's the part that's gonna fuck people in the ass right here. Whenever the water comes down, because I can imagine the water coming down, and then somebody stands in it and they die. Right, that in my mind, I figure that's going to be pretty much a guaranteed what's going to happen.
And the incubation fluid debuffs.
So yeah, not a whole lot going on, but of course, as with all of our PTR previews, to end the video, what are our thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, it's okay.
I like chasing it down. That's badass.
Extremely difficult on Mythic. The incoming damage that the raid was taking once everyone had an incubation fluid debuff was absolutely insane.
Yeah, it was pretty nutty.
Okay.
And this is made even harder on Mythic because of the way that the jellyfish ads have been changed. Way more of them spawn throughout Mythic, to the point where, well, we were playing around with a strategy of keeping them up and nuking the boss and just hoping we could kill them all at the end.
Yeah,
I don't know about that, dude.
Yeah, the damage was really, really high.
Yeah, that might be a little bit. Actually, we could maybe try that.
I just cannot wait to see. I think it could potentially be a really difficult boss.
Yeah, we could try that. That's a good idea.
Versions of this encounter, really. Everyone kind of.
We could just not kill any of the jellyfish, and just tank them away in normal mode. I bet that would work. Or maybe it would. I don't know.
An important job. You know, tanks can't mess up their stacks or it's a wipe. DPS, if you don't kill the ads and the circles aren't soaked, it's a wipe. If healers don't chain their cooldowns towards the end of phase 1, then it's a wipe. There isn't a lot of other mechanics going on. Just everyone in the raid does have a job that they need to execute. Otherwise, you know, the whole thing just falls to pieces. And I like that.
It's very delicate, you could say.
Absolutely,
like, if just one thing goes wrong, then everything starts falling behind. Mainly just to the tank stacks, really.
Okay.
If they're just misplaced at any point, because
they can
DPS
ice
can't
block.
even
It doesn't even
help
matter.
Try and reset them. It will always hit
Or the mages can
tank,
ice block
even
for
if
the
the tank is
absorber.
a
Well, that's
high
the thing.
threat.
DPS can help them because if the ads die fast,
Yeah, of course.
that
I mean,
gives the
if,
tanks
who
more
gives a
time.
fuck?
It doesn't really give you any recovery. That's more
Oh,
what I'm
right,
saying.
yeah.
So if you get it wrong, then you've really got it wrong.
You gonna tank?
Someone's
I
gonna
might
die,
actually
and
tank.
you just need to try and get them back up and try and salvage what you can.
That'd be a good
which can
idea.
be
Maybe
very
I could tank
difficult in
it.
this fight.
As for the other aspects of the encounter, I think the transition's really cool.
Yeah, I really
the
like the
addition
transition.
of the
This is
jellyfish.
badass.
Because when we first tested this, you could everyone just leapt down. We just used the speed totem, and it was a complete joke getting to the bottom.
Okay.
But nowadays, those jellyfish is really unclear whether or not they're the things actually one-shotting us. I'm pretty sure they are, but some people managed to make the jump, other people didn't. So just to err on the safe side, just for the first week of heroic, I would probably avoid going over that gap.
Yeah,
just for now,
just go down
until
the ramp.
people understand what's going on.
One thing we should
So we're
mention
gonna do
is
it on the
tank
first
damage.
day.
Is very high.
Yeah, it's so insane that on the pool you will just get one shot as a tank.
I think we'll
of course
clear
you
the
can
whole thing.
precast CDs to counter that.
You think
but
so?
It's maybe a little bit.
Do you think
Oh,
we're
yeah,
gonna wipe?
I don't. Yeah, we'll definitely wipe, but I think we can do it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem overly challenging yet. Like, all of these fights seem relatively straightforward. There's just 2 mechanics you have to deal with, and that's basically it.
too strong, and ultimately this fight, I mean, it could just be cheesed by monks.
Yeah, not only is Saga super powerful, and you can use Zen meds to soak the patches from the little ads when they die, but it's just totems. Their ox statues are so good for picking up ads.
Yep.
And the thing is, you can tank swap all the time with multiple ads if you have 2 monk tanks as well. And I can easily see that being the mythic strat as well, just because of how frequently those ads come in. I don't think you're going to want to kill them every single time they spawn. You'll probably want to kill them every 2 times. So the tanks will need to be swapping the entire time that's going on. And
Well,
that's
that makes
only
sense.
really
Yeah,
gonna
of
be
course.
done with monks. So yeah, I can see a lot of the
Yeah,
top
it's the
guilds
same
go
with
for
the
that
other
double
yeah,
monk
of course.
strategy for this fight.
And even if that isn't the strategy, monk is still the best tank for this fight by miles.
I
which
hate
isn't
monks.
necessarily a problem.
I really
But
do.
I think they could be a little bit kinder to the other classes by maybe bringing the boss damage down a little before it hits live servers.
No, I don't believe in that. They should make the boss damage very, very high. Like, there's so many fights nowadays where the tank damage is cosmetic. Like, it doesn't even matter if your tank takes a lot of damage, because they have so many different ways to deal with it. I want to see more abilities and more things in the game that make it harder for you to tank bosses just fundamentally, right? The bosses just simply do more damage. And I like that a lot more. Most of these mechanics are so similar to earlier bosses, disappointing. I mean, the thing is that, like, nowadays, you can always compare one mechanic to another mechanic. Like, when was the last time we had a truly unique mechanic happen? It's very hard to say. It's not very cosmetical, not mythic. Yeah, that's like one exception, though. Just in general, I feel like tank damage isn't really as much of a factor as it should be.
Dude, I like the mechanic on Mythic KJ with the balls. I like that. That was kind of cool.
I'm gonna be honest. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, good.
I agree.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah, I actually thought that it was really fucking cool. Like, there were a lot of reasons and a lot of ways that I liked it a lot. Like, fuck yeah, it was amazing. It was annoying, right? It's like, it's bad for, like, doing it in pugs and shit, but the mechanic itself, where you have to get knocked around in, like, a different order, like, that's really, really cool. And you guys are right about Mechatorque. Like, Mechatorque is actually a good example of a new mechanic. But overall, I'm okay with old mechanics being reused. Generally. Like, obviously there should be some new things, but old mechanics being reused, I don't fundamentally dislike.
But to conclude, even though the fight, of course, doesn't have many mechanics and abilities, for the most part, it is just stand still, target swap, and nuke the boss.
Good.
But it's still a fun fight, and the abilities that are there do work well together, and I think Blizzard did a pretty good job there.
That's what matters.
Either way, guys, that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you very much for watching. If you do want to keep up to date with this boss,
I don't know about
and be
Jadefar.
ready to kill it first week when it hits live servers.
Easy fucking boss. Easy fucking boss. Dude, we're going to clear this raid so easy, man. I can't even believe it. Like, this is a joke, boss. Okay, here we go. The Queen's Court. Now, I feel like if this raid is going to get harder, it will probably be at this boss, but we'll see.
Hello and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at the 6th encounter in the Eternal Palace, the Queen's Court.
So this encounter consists of 2 bosses with separate health pools and different abilities and mechanics that you have to counter. To add, Queen Ashara will ask you to perform certain actions throughout the fight, which have various negative effects if you fail to execute them. Anyway, let's start off by explaining the core boss mechanics.
So tanks need to keep the bosses spread at all times. If they remain within 21 yards of each other, they both take 99% less damage. After all of our testing, we believe tanking Silavaz in the middle of the room.
Another unique and different mechanic that's never been used before. The 2 mobs have to be tanked apart from each other, so you know, if they're not, they take no damage. Wow, incredible.
And Pashma on the outsides is likely to be the best formation to try and maintain in order to deal with the majority of abilities. Tanks will need to perform swaps on these 2 bosses throughout the fight, as Silavaz gains a stacking attack speed increase that is only reset when he attacks a new target, and Pashma applies a stacking debuff that will mind control you once it reaches 10 stacks. We decided to normally swap around the 8 stack mark. Now, for the raid to keep an eye on is Silavaz's charge.
He'll really, like,
random player, and after 6 seconds...
They've really got to think of some better tank mechanics here, man. Like, they're so boring. Like, I mean, like, this is why I'm saying tanking is so fucking easy. Like, you literally just... I mean, every single fucking mechanic is you spread them out, and there's a debuff that you have to swap on. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just... It's too much for me, man. It's way too fucking much. Okay, let's look at the rest of this.
He'll charge towards them and hit them for a lethal amount of frost damage. This, however, is split between all players within 8 yards. So you want to stack up on that target to help spread the damage. Now this will also spawn a puddle on the ground that lasts a pretty long time, dealing ticking damage to anyone who's stood within it. So when you're targeted, you want to move to the edges of the room, and others should follow you to make sure that you actually survive when you're charged. Now when Silavaz reaches max energy, he'll cast Zealous Eruption. This creates a large zone around him as he begins to deal large taking damage to the raid. If you're stood
so he's going
into
Super Saiyan mode.
You take no damage whatsoever. So as the cast starts, you want to make sure you're within the circle beforehand.
As for Pashma, she'll debuff players with Fanatical Verdict.
This
debuff deals a moderate amount of damage to you and any players within 5 yards when it expires, so you've got to make sure that you move away from others before it times out. She'll also spawn a set of orbs on a timer. These orbs always spawn in the exact same locations and slowly lose health. When they eventually die, they'll deal a large amount of burst damage to the entire raid, also debuffing you, increasing the damage you take from these orb explosions for 5 seconds. So in high botanist fashion, you'll want to nuke down a single orb immediately, wait for the debuff to drop, and then nuke the second, and then completely ignore the last one, letting it explode by itself well after your debuff has dropped for a second time. And last to mention,
botanists,
Pashmar at
basically.
full energy will cast Violent Outburst.
Yeah, it's the
This
exact
deals
same thing,
large
I think.
damage to all raid members at the end of the cast. However, this is significantly reduced by moving away from the boss, which is achieved pretty much passively by tanking her away from the raid.
Has there been one unique mechanic in this entire boss? Like, you have the botanist balls, you have the conclave run into the circle thing. Yes, split them apart, that's right. They've never had an idea where you have to split up the two different bosses. We've never done Trial of Valor, we've never done Antorus. These boss fights don't exist. And let's see. Wait for it? Okay, alright. We'll see if this changes.
With her stood far away from the raid, you will want your ranged DPS to focus her down, while primarily the melee focus on Silivaz. You do, however, need to keep a very close eye on boss health throughout the fight, as when the bosses reach 1 health, they'll begin a long cast that will heal them for a shitload. And this is only interrupted when both bosses are killed at the same time.
Yep.
So DPS will have to swap throughout the fight just to make sure that heal never goes through.
Right, just like the first boss in Crucible.
We do, however, have Queen Ashara being a nuisance with her decrees.
So this ability is cast on a timer, forcing you to deal with 1 of 5 decrees. The order you need to deal with them does seem to be set, however in one of the earlier tests it was completely random.
Okay.
All that we do know for certain is that it doesn't seem possible to get the same one twice in a row. Let's have a look at these. So form ranks causes multiple circles to appear in the room. If these circles aren't quickly stood within, they'll explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage. These are typically spawned towards the middle of the room, usually very close to one another. This also overlaps with Silivaz's Zealous Eruption cast, which is why tanking him in the middle of the room is a pretty good idea.
Okay,
Another
so
one
you
you'll
just
get is
stand in 'em.
Repeat Performance. This debuff is applied to the entire raid for 30 seconds. All it simply does is silence and pacify you whenever you cast the same ability twice.
Wait, so it's literally punishing people for being bad at their rotation? Like, that's amazing. Okay, so there's a genuine fucking mechanic in the game that it punishes players for being bad at their rotation. I think that's really funny. Demon Hunter? Wait, what?
Don't monks already have that as a mastery?
I don't even know. I have no idea.
Is that true? That's still true, right? Yeah, it's like yeah.
What's it called?
Combo something, I don't know. Hit combo.
Combo breaker.
Combo strikes.
Combo breaker.
strikes.
Okay, combo breaker. Let's see. Oh, Asmongold, there's your new mechanic. Yeah, there's a new mechanic right fucking there. Holy shit. All right, that's interesting.
So you pretty much just got to pretend that you're a Windwalker monk until the debuff drops.
Yeah.
You've also got the stand alone decree.
That ain't Falco.
Surprisingly, it just asks you to stand alone, away from any other players. If you do get too close to others, you'll both just start taking bursts of damage. This on some of our tests also overlapped with horrible points, such as when you want to stack up for someone getting charged, and again for Silivaz's Zealous Eruption cast when you want to be inside of his bubble. Now as for the deferred sentence, it asks of you to move. Whilst you stand still, you'll just gain a stacking debuff. This debuff itself doesn't do anything, however at the end of the decree, 30 seconds after it initially came in, all of your stacks will just simply explode, dealing a shit ton of damage to you. Fortunately, you can keep your stacks under control by moving. Each time you move, your stacks will reset, and you'll just take a small amount of damage per stack.
Okay, I like that.
Keeping your stacks around the 3 or 4 stack mark at most was safe.
So if you're just AFK, you die.
The Obey or Suffer decree.
That's
this
awesome.
Makes it so whenever you take damage, you'll become healing immune for 5 seconds. Now this sounds absolutely terrifying if you're a tank, however when the healing immunity drops, you can't gain it again, or at least it doesn't seem that you can, for at least another 5 seconds, allowing healers to top you up in between healing immunities.
Okay.
As for everyone else, not a
anti-asthma
whole lot
mechanic,
changes,
exactly.
just don't take damage regularly so your healers can keep you topped up.
Alrighty.
That's it for all the abilities and mechanics in play for the fight on normal and heroic difficulty, and for live it really does seem that the only significant points for you to progress through will be overlaps with decrees and other abilities directly from the bosses. Aside from that, it's all very simple and pretty easy to counter as long as you're paying attention. As for the mythic version of the encounter, it's a pretty large step up.
This boss doesn't really seem like it's that difficult.
One of the structures in the
yeah,
room,
this seems pretty simple.
Section, preventing people from standing in it, basically.
Yeah, this will
slowly
not
rotate around the room, covering a new
not
structure.
that bad, dude. This
time
raid's
a
gonna
new
be a
decree
joke,
comes in.
man.
And the mythic, these come in fast. There's
Oh my
absolutely
God.
no downtime whatsoever. And they
I'm
overlap with
amazed.
pretty much every ability that the bosses have, forcing you to learn every single overlap. These overlaps also have different timers or spell orders as the fight goes on, which also means you need to deal with them slightly differently each time.
Okay.
But anyway, with all of our PTR previews, what do we think of this encounter?
It's good.
Well, I think maybe the normal and heroic version of the fight is maybe a bit bland. The amount of overlaps
Thank God.
with,
That means we'll
max
be able to
energy
beat it
abilities
easily.
could probably be increased, so it's slightly similar to Mythic. But then you can just tune it in such a way so that it is okay if you don't necessarily execute it perfectly every single time.
I would hope so.
You know, dealing with very basic mechanics such as move out and soak the charge, move out with a verdict, stand in Silivaz's circle and move away from Pashmar's circle.
Seems simple.
With nothing else going on the majority
Yeah,
of the time.
that's a joke fight.
It's just kind of boring. The fight only really becomes exciting when you also have decrees to deal with at the exact same time. That while testing on heroic, the very first test, we didn't really see much of.
But on the later test, which was on normal and mythic difficulty, it did seem that they tried to increase the amount that you would see the decrease. Of course, on mythic it was all the time, whereas on normal mode, there's only a 30-second gap in between each one, and they last 30 seconds long each, give or take. So, you know, it did make it so they were quite a key part of the fight. And as you said, those parts of the fight are interesting, especially when you get standalone and you know, soak the guy. Because you're like, how are we going to deal with this? Are we just going to throw a bunch of shields at that guy? Like, everyone void stone the poor fella and try and
joke
save him,
fight.
or are we just going to quickly stack up?
We'll one-shot
like,
this one.
Fuck the
It'll be
decree, we
that
have to try
simple.
and save the guy, which probably is the right thing to do.
Easy
but, you know,
one
it's
shot.
a little bit of a decision
Easy
that
one
you
shot,
get to
boys.
make, which is kind of where the interesting parts of this fight lie. But aside from the one issue where sometimes the downtime can be a little bit boring, it's overall a very solid encounter and did feel polished. And again, we probably already made it clear, on Mythic it is very, very cool.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what comps are going to be used for this, for guilds that are going to be going in on Mythic difficulty,
we'll see what they think
especially
we
if it's
should
tightly
use.
tuned. The fact that you have to have the bosses spread apart and they do need to die within a similar time period, you're just going to see a bunch of... You know why Shadow's been nerfed now.
Yeah, that's actually true.
Loads of multi.
That's what happened in
it
Crucible.
really wouldn't surprise me that if this fight is difficult, you're going to really see a massive drop in some of the melee DPS that just can't cleave between these two mobs, which I think is so unnecessary. I think it would be better if the bosses could be stacked and you have to constantly think about dragging them apart from one another depending on their special abilities, and that way you can actually bring melee DPS without feeling like, oh, we should bring a shadow or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just bring
melee
them
is
all
just
in.
so useless,
Why not?
man.
Why not just allow them to be stacked? Give them more health if you want the fight to last.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, also the thing with the fight, especially on Mythic, I know we keep going back to Mythic.
This is so stupid.
I think that's the one that we're, you know.
What's stupid about it? They're just easier to punish.
Large personal damage reductions are
That's
very
why it's
important in this
stupid
fight as well. The ability to cheese some
well,
of the
then
charges.
re-roll.
So you have enough damage reductions up, and again, like you said,
well, then stop whining.
Not having to soak at set
Fuck
points
you.
is going to be vital.
Yeah, it's going to be really useful.
Having certain people that can stand out of those circles because you know the entire raid has standalone and there's not enough space within the circle for everyone to stand in. Maybe you're going to want some people standing out using personals instead.
All right, we get it. We get it.
Hello guys and welcome back to Fatboss TV. Today we're looking at the penultimate encounter in the Eternal Palace with Zakul, Harbinger of Nyalotha.
Okay.
Yes, this four-phase encounter is absolutely awesome, with a theme of using different realms in order to counter certain boss mechanics.
Okay.
The first three phases are pretty short, but gives you experience of all of the realms before needing to use all of them in the long last phase, where everything comes to a chaotic mess. Anyway, let's jump straight into it with the start of the fight.
So when you first pull the boss, he'll cover the entire outsides of the room in darkness. If you stand within this area, you take massive ticking damage, so you've got to avoid it. This is really easy to deal with, aside from when he casts Dread. This debuffs random players in your raid, fearing them until the debuff is dispelled or it expires.
Well, that's easy.
However, it'll also explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage. We counter this by using pre-shields and healing cooldowns with a Master Spell or a Tremor Totem each time. But even with stacking cooldowns, it's still pretty dangerous. Since testing, this damage does seem to be significantly nerfed in the Dungeon Journal, so it's probably safe to say that on live you can just dispel everyone instantly, providing the raid is at full health. Also to watch out for is the Crushing Grasp. When cast, this causes a portal to open on one side of the room, which a tentacle will punch through and then slam across the room. You've got a long time to react and move from it, which is important to do so.
So that's pretty simple. You just move out of it.
And can knock you back into the darkness around the edges of the room, which is pretty much an instant death. As for tanks, you'll want to remain stacked the entire fight because of Mind Tether. The boss will always connect the tank with the nearest player, dealing 50% of the damage the main tank takes to the linked player as shadow damage.
That's not a big
deal. If the
deal.
linked player is more than 12 yards away, that percentage is increased further. Tanks also need to remain in the same
tanks need to stand on top of each other.
will also be stunned for 10 seconds each time Mind Tether is applied. These three abilities, so the Dread debuffs, the Tentacles and the Tank Cleave, are used throughout the entire fight in all phases. Now, not too long into phase 1, the boss will spawn 3 Portals of Madness. As these spawn, you need to stay away from them at first, as they'll fear anyone as the summoner ads appear from them. Now, these guys will cast Dark Tear, spawning lots of small little vision ads. These have a 30 stack debuff that slowly over time drops, at which point they'll evolve into an even stronger mob. so you'll want to kill them off before that happens, which while testing was done with just passive cleave. If the Dark Tear channel from the summoner ad finishes, the entire raid is burst for a lethal amount of damage, so you want to make sure that you kill these ads off one by one. We moved the boss to each just to keep it cleave.
You just kill the ads.
Whilst doing so, it's very likely that the boss will reach 85% health and enter phase 2 and bring the entire raid into the Fear Realm.
Alrighty.
Now whilst you're in this realm, the entire raid gains a stack of Hysteria every 15 seconds. This dot deals very little damage and it isn't very noticeable, but it is important for later in the fight. Also in this realm, the boss will cast Maddening Eruption. This creates a large targeting zone, typically on the opposite side of the room. Shortly after it appears, it will explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage. However, if the boss is placed within it before it explodes, the raid damage is removed, and instead the boss will take 30% increased damage for 20 seconds. This happens pretty often, so tanks need to be quick to react and move the boss the moment they spawn. The raid to watch out for is Manifest Nightmares. This debuff is applied to 2 players, dealing a small amount of ticking damage, whilst causing the player to spawn patches underneath them. These patches do absolutely insane damage, two-shotting people in most cases.
So you just have to kite them away from the raid. That's easy.
Damage almost immediately.
Actually, you know what?
You've got to be spread.
That's really bad because I can guarantee you some dumbass is gonna leave it in the raid. So I don't know how we're gonna be able to handle that, man. Watch fans, who gives a shit? Let's see. Yeah, that's kind of bad. We'll have to make sure people know for sure to move out with the debuff
before they're applied. Otherwise, you'll instantly cleave the raid to pieces.
There it is.
These patches will also spawn vision ads, which again, we passively multi-dot and cleave down. Once you get the boss to 70% health, phase 3 will begin with the boss casting Delirium's Descent.
In Kilrock fashion, this will generate 3 portals in front of him. If they're left unsoaked, they'll explode, dealing large raid-wide damage. When a player soaks the circle, they're taken into the Delirium realm. Inside here, you gain Hysteria stacks at an increased rate, and also completely hostile to all other players. You do, however, gain a very large haste increase, allowing you to plow damage into the boss. If you ever die whilst you're inside here, you will instead be returned into the Fear Realm, but you will be stunned for 6 seconds.
So you just
this
need
can,
to...
however, be dispelled by your healers. So all you need to do in this phase is get your DPS to keep soaking the circles, keep being sent down, so
that's
they can just plow damage into the boss, whilst everyone else just deals with the mechanics from phase 2.
Now once you manage to get the boss to 50%
so just have
health,
DPS
the
go
first
down.
Arcanist,
That's simple.
Woman, lady will drag the entire raid back to the normal realm from phase 1. And she'll now stand still, keeping open a portal, and this is where the final phase begins. In this phase, the boss will continue to have that tank link and the tentacle slam, as Loz already mentioned, but the dreads have evolved into manic dreads. This makes the debuff players also leave behind patches that explode after a few seconds when they've been dispelled, which means ideally you want them to be dispelled away from the raid. So we opted to use manual dispels here instead of AoE ones. Once the patch has finished exploding, players can now stand within them and gain a stacking debuff. At 5 stacks of this debuff, you'll be sent into the Delirium realm. This needs to be done because the boss on a timer will cast Dark Pulse. This applies a massive absorb shield to himself, and if the shield is not broken in time and the cast finishes, then all players in all realms are hit with a massive amount of damage. By having players go into the Delirium realm beforehand, this is much easier to break as they have that
What the fuck is this? So you have to assign people to go down there into each different specific realm? The Void boss fights are like 30. Yeah, this is insane, dude. Yeah, it's a 24-hour stream. No, honestly, guys, it's gonna be easy. We're gonna be able to beat this boss like probably on the first try. I mean, we might have like maybe a little bit more, you know, maybe 2 or 3 tries, but overall, I think this is gonna be a joke fight. Okay, we just assigned the right people to go down. That's it. What were you saying?
Huh?
I don't know. I heard you say something.
No.
% haste increased.
Okay.
Whilst testing, even on normal mode, this felt like a requirement in order to break the shield, unless you use something crazy like Bloodlust and large DPS cooldowns. After you have broken the shield, and if you're in the Delirium realm, you can go over to the first Arcanist and use an extra action button while standing on her portal. This will bring you back to the normal realm. Now the boss in this phase will also begin to spawn the horrific summoners you saw from phase 1. The only difference here with these guys is that they can only be attacked from the Fear realm. To access that realm, you need to stand on top of their portals and hit your extra action button.
Wait, there's 3 realms?
This sounds pretty easy, right? The boss gains a massive shield, you send some people into the Delirium realm to break it. The ad spawn, you send some people down into the Fear realm to kill them off before their cast is finished. Sadly, it's not that simple. When players are within the Fear realm, the mechanics from phase 2 and 3 will be active, and only can be seen from within that realm, yet the damage aspects will hit everyone in all of the realms. So to make that clear, the maddening eruption circles still need to be soaked by the boss, or it's a wipe. And players of the Manifest Nightmares need to make sure that their patches are away from people in other realms, or it's a wipe.
Oh my god.
To make matters worse, the Manic Dread damages also apply to all realms. And the damage from this far
This is mythic,
anything
right?
else, forcing everyone to be in the
normal.
same realm so that they can be affected by shields and healing cooldowns, so that they're topped quickly after the damage has come in.
So this phase requires a shitload of communication, and the room for different strategies is actually pretty high.
Man?
The way that we were doing it on PTL was just to keep everyone in normal realms whenever possible, especially the tanks, as this just means you never really need to worry about the Hysteria stacks. DPS and healers would only ever move into the Fear realm whenever the adds were up, and whilst they were in there they would communicate and place down wall markers for the tanks to move into for each of the maddening eruption circles. As for the Dark Pulse shields, we didn't do anything special apart from sending players down beforehand into the Delirium realm just so they can nuke the shield off. And before Manic Dread...
Do you think we could just have everybody stay in one realm and it wouldn't matter? Because it'd be normal mode and we can heal through the AoE damage?
Hell no.
You don't think so? I don't know. It seems unlikely.
No, dude.
No, like, yeah, I mean, maybe that could be a normal mode strat, but probably not. I mean, you know, hey, guys, I'm trying to be an optimist here, okay? That's all I'm trying to do. I wish that was the case.
Were applied, everyone would return back to the normal realm by speaking to the Arcanist or using the ad portals to be topped back up, but also to let the Hysteria stacks reset. And after all that's done, the fight just repeats from there until you finally kill him off. We think that this is very likely to be the way that you'll want to do it on live, but potentially, as we already said, there are lots of different ways we can do it. One other way that we didn't ever try but we were considering was just keeping everyone in the Fear realm at all times and only going into the normal realm just to reset your Hysteria stacks at some point.
There it is.
The issue with the strategy is that if the debuff has just been reapplied, it does take 25 seconds for it to drop
We have
off,
to think of the dumbest strat possible to kill this boss.
Raid, which means healers are going to have to go back to the normal realm with you.
Okay.
However, if you time it before a Dark Pulse, when no other mechanics are happening whatsoever, then it would probably be safe to do so. The only other issue with the strategy is that tanks are also going to need to reset their stacks at some point, which can be risky with their timing on their Mind Tether. But by remaining in the Fear realm, there are a lot of positives, as you can always instantly swap to the adds, and the boss is going to have a consistent damage increase up on him because of the circles that the tank's going to be soaking. But it's certainly a more risky strategy than using the normal realm strat. But anyway, that's the fight. What do we think?
Yeah,
it's hard. That's what I think is hard.
That's too hard.
This is crazy. Like, this is like a normal mode boss. Like, I mean, I've got to... Like, you got to have a PhD to understand this boss. That's too many degrees. It's insane, man.
I think that this boss, if pulled off correctly, could, in theory, be the best boss in this.
What about
instance,
Mythic? What the fuck's happening?
Dude, don't even talk about that, man. Yeah. Don't even talk about it.
I just love it. I like the way that
I don't
want
to think about it.
Phases are kind of tutorials, right? So the first phase is like, this is how the boss works. You've got a big dick slamming across the platform. Make sure you're avoiding them. It's like, okay. Then the second phase is just teaching you how the Fear realm works in terms of like how you got to deal with those particular sets of mechanics. And then the third phase is how the Delirium realm works, which isn't, you know, that complicated, but at least some DPS get to go in there and plow some damage and start getting used to it. And then phase 4 is just like, now do it all together with some enhanced mechanics.
Yeah, it's like fucking Memoron.
How you want to do that? Well, you just explained two
phase 4 is like all of them at the same time.
Them is probably going to be like the meta strat. Something else is going to come out.
So we could use Euro at the end and then just burn everything down
throughout the fight, and it never feels like, oh my god, what's happening? Because you've always just been taught over this steady period of time, which is a really good way of doing it.
I do like that.
On this fight, it's pretty
I like that a lot.
In the last phase, instead of you having just to damage the boss to get through his Dark Pulse shield, you now need to damage certain adds within certain realms. So you have to be sending a Fear group down, you have to be sending a Delirium group down, also actually dealing with the boss's mechanics itself at the same time. I have no idea. This boss sounds be crazy. Absolutely mental.
This is a cock, man.
With this boss, the first of which
this is a huge cock boss.
It's not entirely clear how the Manifest Nightmare pools are supposed to be interacting between realms.
Because
sometimes you'll be in the Delirium realm and you're stood in the wrong position and you don't know that you are because you can't see anything on the ground, but you just die and get sent out early. Even in the normal realm, you could be stood in goo that you can't actually see, but sometimes you can see it, and sometimes you'll be stood in the position where that goo would normally be but not be taking damage. Basically, it's super buggy right now. That thing just didn't seem to be working correctly.
Or
I think this is kind of badass, and I feel like, look at the guy's name. His name is like, what is it, Zaquul, or whatever the fuck? Harbinger of Nilotha. Like, that's the Black Empire, man. Like, this shit's actually gonna happen. What?
It is. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm actually getting a little hype for this, man.
Not Mick-cool, Zuh-cool.
Zuh-cool, yeah. Pretty close though. Almost McCool. Okay, let me go and we'll see what the rest of their thoughts are.
And they're just bastards.
They could be.
And if that is the case, then that really should only be in a Mythic.
Yeah,
I think the fact that that would be in normal mode, as an example, is brutal as hell.
Yeah, I think that if it is going to interact between realms, make it so it can be seen in all realms. And
yeah,
if you
that's
want to make
insane.
That difficult thing where you don't
so you have
know
the
where it's gonna be,
coordinated
make that
voice chat?
Mechanic,
Yeah,
as you said.
I think that's fair.
Because the thing that we ended up doing is just
Holy
leaving all the pools
fuck,
generally
man.
around the middle of the room. So if you ever wanted to be safe in a realm, you could stand towards the edges, which also made it easier to avoid the tentacles slamming across the room. Also, the dread damage that we did encounter was very, very high, like kind of unfairly high. So it does look like, at least from the dungeon journal, which isn't always very accurate, that has been reduced somewhat. So let's just hope that they have put that into effect, because although it is the main source of incoming damage and the other sources of damage in the fight don't
That's
really
one more key thing. I should find the subs, man. Thank you,
so
thank you.
Maybe make it so the Hysteria stacks do more damage, but the dread damage has been reduced.
I agree with that completely, because the dread damage was ridiculous. As an example, on Mythic, if you was to dispel all of them at the same time, it just flat out one-shot the raid, unless you used like multiple damage reduction.
It's not really supposed to all be dispelled at the same time, though, is it? You're supposed to stagger it.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the fact that people are doing 40 and 38,000 DPS now? And we're not even at the last tier? Like, by the time that we get to the last tier, people are going to probably be doing 100,000 DPS. Like, we're gonna be all the way back to 100k Andes again in one fucking expansion.
What?
It's just indicative of how fast the power creep is happening. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It's insane. There's like, 3 tiers of gear each raid. It's fucking ridiculous, man. Level squish, we'll see what happens.
Maybe so, but...
Okay, we'll go to the last boss. All right.